This is a special bonus episode of the Uptime Wind Energy podcast, and I have Joel Saxon here. Joel's down in Texas at the moment, and they're having some pretty massive ice storms. It seems like January, February in Texas is quite the adventure, and there's been some blade damage and ice being thrown, and a lot of RCAs and evals happening on blades. And I thought it'd just be a good time to discuss, since it is wintertime, what to do about some of these icing conditions and how we're handling them, and what's some of the paths forward. Joel, would you like to just give us an idea of what you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll give you the environmental conditions in Texas right now, and then kind of talk about some of the things we saw in the field in the last few days. But and this is for people who maybe you're in an area of the world that doesn't see icing, or you are, and you may have some great feedback to tell us. But right now, so I'm in between San Antonio and Austin, Texas, and I'm looking out the window, and this is not normal for this corner of the world. But there's a pin oak tree in the front yard that's probably got, I don't know, 5,000 pounds of ice in the leaves and branches. I mean, there's 14-inch branches that are just boom, bent right down to the ground, right? So there's power lines failing. There's a half-inch of ice on the deck everywhere. I drove last night. We had on the Wind Power Lab team. We did an RCA up in northern Texas. We were up by Wichita Falls, and so we had to do some traveling around the state. And the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex just got pounded with snow and ice, something that normally doesn't happen there, right? You think Texas, you're thinking, shorts and long sleeve shirt or something in the wintertime, and you're good. But I mean, I counted in one stretch of highway yesterday while traveling 19 different accidents because of the icing on the roads. Wow. Right. And so when you think about this now, there's some general thoughts. It rains, it's 32 degrees. Well, if the blades are cold, they're going to pick that ice up. And as they travel around, they're going to get ice and more ice and more ice and more ice. Also, that happens, but it also can happen where you may not even be getting any ice on the ground, any accumulation of rain or sleet or anything like that. But 100 feet above you, there may be this fog layer, and that sometimes is an ice fog. And when things spin around in that ice fog, it's almost worse because of the way it builds up on the wind turbine blades. They lose performance. And then once they get kind of jagged and spiky with the ice buildup on the edges, it just tends to build up more and more and more and more. So an ice accumulation that's not shiny and clean tends to build up even more and more ice. So in the last few days in Texas, the majority of wind farms saw some kind of an icing event. There's a lot of ways to protect against that. We've been talking on the show regularly about de-icing coatings and some other things of that sort. But when it really comes down to it, there's some damages and some safety items that we always, at the Wind Power Lab side, try to get people to understand. If you're operating a wind farm right now in Texas, you really can't go out into the field. You can't stand underneath these turbines if they're still operating, because when that ice starts to break loose, a hard hat isn't going to save you from a 20-pound piece of ice that's been thrown 300 feet through the air. Sorry, it is what it is. So there is things that people try to do when they're operating wind farms. Sometimes pitching blades different ways manually through the control systems. You can get ice to chip off, fall off. And that works sometimes, but for the most part, you're waiting. If you're not prepped for it, right? If you don't have a blade heating system, which is elements within the blades that send electricity through, and they actually heat the blade, which is like an Arctic package, which basically no turbine in Texas has. That's more. Right. That's an Alberta and a Sweden and Norway type thing. The Arctic packages. If you don't have that, a lot of times you're just waiting for the ice to slough off. And some people keep running their turbines in it and, watch the vibration alarms and the SCADA data. And if the vibration gets to be too much, they may shut them down to avoid bearing damage. But we do see some in the RCA world, we do see some RCA and end of warranty campaigns, we've seen the exact same wind turbine make model blade in a warm climate at an end of warranty campaign have 2 or 3 damages per blade versus in a frozen climate that was ran when they were iced for 2 or 3 years. Ooh. Have 100 damages per blade. We've seen it. This isn't me saying I think I've heard of that before. This is me seeing the report that it has happened. So there's a lot of damages that can come. I mean, ice throw. Think about this too. 20-pound piece of ice, blade whirring around, ice lets loose. It may throw that ice straight up in the air. When that ice comes back down, blade number 2 comes back around, smashes right into it. So now you're hitting a 20-pound piece of ice at the leading edge of your turbine blade, and you're going to end up with impact damage if that is left undiscovered or left to its own devices. Pitching or peeling, chipping of the coatings, it can get into a structural repair very quickly as well. So, I mean,
yeah, there is so much mass to pieces of ice. I know when you see it some ice on a massive blade, you don't really think that much about it because the blades are so strong and powerful. You think, well, that ice is not going to have any effect. But those are big pieces of ice, and the analogy I always use, well, it took down a space shuttle, right?
Yeah.
Ice broke off, hit the space shuttle, broke off some tiles, and it ended up catastrophic. The same kind of thing happens structurally in terms of wind turbine blade. If it snaps off ice and it runs into another blade, man, the impacts are enormous and they're focused. When composites do not like that kind of direct tangential force on the surface, and they'll crack, they'll fail. You can actually poke a hole in them if you get enough force there. They're just not designed for that.
Yeah,
which is I think the trouble.
Yeah, think about it from a really I always try to break things down into a practical sense, right? So you're driving down the highway and some hunk of ice or snow or something comes off the top of a semi truck, flies through the air, and maybe it hits the road, or you've been unlucky enough to have one hit your car or your windshield. Same thing, bigger pieces of ice, and now that blade might be coming around at 175 miles an hour. And instead of being a metal car that it hits or the pavement that it hits, it's a composite structure.
Yeah.
So, there's our friends Ping of the show. They have it's one of their newest versions of the Ping monitor. They can detect icing buildup, which is fantastic. So, if the icing is very uniform on the blades and it builds up the same on all of them, you may not get a vibration alarm through your SCADA system, but you may still have icing buildup that you won't know about. The Ping monitor can pick that up, can say, hey, you've got an icing event going on here. You should maybe, you can eliminate some damage by shutting down or whatnot, but at least you're in the know. Then you have a better way of making decisions, whether you want to keep them running or not, right? So Ping does that. Right. Ping can do that for you. There's most other blade monitoring systems. There's a lot of CMS systems coming out into the world right now. Whether they're
Eologics.
Yeah.
Talk to Eologics for a second.
Yeah, Eologics.
Because is a pretty smart system where they're putting essentially temperature patches, I'll call them, that talk remotely to a controller. So it knows what the temperature is on the blade, and it can tell if there's ice being built up because they have basically an ice sensor in each of them. So they'll put multiple of these little patches onto the blade, and that's a really smart move because it'll tell you if the blade is actually free of ice, so you can start back up again, which is a big problem, is you just don't know when to start, right? So there's a lot of good products on the market, Ping, Eologics being, I think, some of the leading ones at the moment. And then, sort of secondarily is the anti-ice coating or the ice-phobic coating, we're calling them. Nine Ice being the one that's the coating du jour because Arones has been talking about it and using it and is applying it from what I can tell watching YouTube and LinkedIn. And Nine Ice is a company that's based out of Kansas. It's not a Norwegian or a Danish or a German company, weirdly
you
enough.
Would think. It sounds, German company.
Yeah, right. It's not based in Sweden where it's cold. It's in Kansas. It doesn't get that cold in Kansas. And then Elemental Coatings, which is, we've had them on the podcast. They're based out in Texas, Houston area, I believe. And they have done some more recent work on their coating. At least I have seen some, more recent information where they've been working in the aerospace world with Boeing and testing their coatings for durability in like a rain erosion environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it has, last I saw, they're doing really well. So there are some new materials, chemicals, chemistries, coatings to put on blades that could help reduce the amount of ice. And because what are you going to do in Texas? At this point, when the blades are already up, you got thousands of wind turbines, tens of thousands of blades out there.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Are you going to try to apply a coating? That's probably your only choice.
Yeah, and then there's an ROI on it too, right? So with these coatings, classically with these coatings, everybody's worried about, I put it on, does it last a winter? Does it last 2 winters? Does it last 3 winters?
Yeah.
Right? So anybody that's developing these coatings from like, the consultant side of me, when we talk to them, we always say, have you done a rain erosion tests? How does it hold up on the leading edge? Right?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So as we said this, I just had a branch break off, about an 8-inch branch just break off and land in the yard. I was like, what is that noise? Yeah. So the ice is real going on right now. So I'm sorry, I digress, but back to the case there. When you're testing these coatings, it's just like testing an LEP coating. You need to make sure you do a rain erosion test. So there's also the rain erosion test. There's a hardness test. There's and I'm going to say this one wrong. I always forget the term, but basically the test of how well it sticks to the substrate. How when you put it on, an adhesion test, how well it can stick to it and how well it stays. So another one to think about as well is a blade flexes, right? So as that blade flexes, does it continuously, is your coating so hard that it cracks and as that blade flexes and moves? So these are all things to think about, right? When you're trying to choose these things, and why everybody has a little bit of their hair up about them in the industry. Do they work? We've heard of Nine Ice that they've been on some turbines for a few years and they're still working. That's fantastic.
Good.
So those of you that don't know about anti-icing coatings, most of them are applied to the leading edge and then about 18 inches to 2 feet down the blade, because that's the fat part of the blade that will, pick up ice and stuff. After that, basically everything kind of sloughs off. You're not going to build it up on the back. You might build it up on the trailing edge a little bit, but that doesn't affect it as aerodynamically. So that's, and how it's applied. Basically, I know like the Nine Ice coating is, can be rolled, can be sprayed. Aeronis is spraying it with their robots. I know that they've used Peter Bertusik's company in the U.S., Blade Platforms, I think. But applied it from platforms. You can roll it or spray it. You can apply it with guys on ropes. If you have blades on the ground, you can do a whole rotor in a day, no problem, and get it back up if you're doing a repower or something like that. But the ROI piece comes back into, if we put it, so what is the business interruption cost that we lose when we have an icing event? So if we have to shut these turbines down, how much money are we losing? And does that cost make up for the cost of installation? Or you can go you can go another route and you can actually insure against that downtime. But
since the last big icing event in Texas, I don't think there's been a lot of changes made to the blades. I know they've done a lot to the infrastructure to keep everything connected. I think they had problems with the grid. It was at 2021 when they had the big ice storm. They had grid problems. They have natural gas problems. The pipelines froze. It was a combination of events that
cascading
led to the big power
outages,
losses. Cascaded on them. But I mean, we talked to Dr. Who out of Iowa State, and that podcast is available on YouTube. And he's a researcher who's looking into icing of wind turbine blades. And there's a wind tunnel at Iowa State, so they have an icing wind tunnel. And we had him before that podcast, and he was describing some of the techniques they're using to create anti-ice or ice-phobic coatings. And a lot of it's based on natural materials, the way a flower or a critter animal handles icing. So different ways, different structures at a really small scale, very fine scale, which is part of the issue with erosion, leading edge erosion on these really fine structures, that they just can't take the pummeling from the rain over time. It wears them out. But they were looking at, I remember this specifically. So I asked them, were there some potential coatings that could survive on a wind turbine? He said, surprisingly, yes. They were testing some at the moment, and that was a year or two ago. And he wrote the book. He's the guy who wrote the book. So there's actually a book on wind turbine blade anti-ice de-icing. And if you go on Amazon and you can look at Doctor Who, it's just HU Doctor Who, and pull up that book, and so it should have all the details. But it's time, Joel. Am I wrong? Because Texas is not going to have fewer wind turbines; it's only going to have more. And you're in a bad spot just because of the cold Canadian air. I don't know why we blame it on Canada, but we always
blame Canada.
The cold Canadian air coming down with that nice warm Gulf of Mexico moisture and then colliding right in Dallas, Fort Worth, West Texas, right? And then you have these massive ice storms. And so it's a unique place where you may not have that kind of icing in like Wisconsin.
Right.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
Type of
yeah.
icing.
And if you're at wind turbines in Wisconsin, basically it snows or it doesn't.
Right.
You know, it's going to be cold, really cold. It's not going to hang out around 31 degrees or 32 degrees in rain for a week. Right. It's just not going to happen. But I think
that's what
you mentioning that. I think so. Speaking with the insurance companies about the increase in natural catastrophes that we've had over the last few years, and that there's outdated models for the insurance companies in some respects for natural catastrophes. As we have, when people say global warming, they're always thinking, they take it so literally, like it's global warming. No, global warming is in different areas of the world where the whole temperature trend comes up, but it changes weather patterns and it makes more extreme weather patterns. So if anything is to show you now, like this icing event here in Texas is not normal. This doesn't normally happen here, it's not like it's, once a month in the wintertime, this happens. This is not a normal thing. And then, we had that event in, I was in Houston when we had the freeze in 21. And that in 21, that freezing event did more dollar value damage than Hurricane Harvey. And Hurricane Harvey dumped 48 inches of rain on that city.
Yeah. It was wider spread.
Yeah, it was
when
wider
you drop
spread.
Electricity and freezing temperatures, problems.
Yeah, well, in Texas, because around Houston, they want to market homes with the most amount of square feet possible. You don't get to charge for your square footage of your utility room. So how do you get around that? Right. You make your utility room in the attic. So put your water heater in the attic and then wait until the temperature drops to 15 degrees and see what happens. And that's what happened across the sub. There was subdivisions with roofs that were raining, right? So. The cost is extreme. So you're going to see more and more of I think over the next 20 years of this the frequency of events like this, where if you were an operator, it might be smart to start looking at Arctic packages for your wind turbines. Iowa, Kansas, North Texas, Oklahoma, you might have to.
Yeah. So this goes back into a discussion we were having that technology changes and the outcome where you end up is maybe a lot different than where you thought it would be. So you pursue a path of like electrically heating blades. That seems to be the way that we do it right now. But these other technology coming in, the ping, the Eologics, the nine ice, the elemental coatings come in and maybe change that whole dynamic where it just, instead of using kilowatts, hundreds of kilowatts to heat these blades, megawatts probably in some cases to heat these blades, now we're back into something that's relatively simple. Yeah, and maybe cost effective to go do.
Yeah, you're
for sure.
You're monitoring it, right? So I'd like to see an ROI. So here's an interesting one. What if we did an ROI? Someone did an ROI study. So there's out of one of the universities up in North Dakota, a company sprang up that developed a retrofit for an in-blade heating fan. So basically sending hot air in one chamber and hoping it comes around the other chamber and pops out. So
right.
A simple enough idea, right? I don't know, but I don't know what the energy consumption of that unit is. So if we could look at what is the energy consumption of that unit and what kind of downtime can it save you from? So what's the cost ROI on that? And then we look at what would be the cost ROI to a Ping or an Eologics or a Phoenix Contact or a 11i or one of these CMS systems saying, hey, we know. And then also because the big thing it's tough to tangibly estimate is if you run these blades with ice on them, how many years of life are you taking off? Right? How much structural fatigue are you introducing there then
Well, I think I talked to Lars Benson about this because he's Canadian. He knows snow.
he's Danish.
Right?
Don't say he's Canadian. He'll get mad at you.
Well, sorry. He's part Canadian, part Danish. I will, but he's lived in Canada long enough.
Yeah.
We can call him Canadian on some level, right? He's got the maple leaf, right? But I was talking to him at dinner one time, and I probably lost track because of the alcohol, but he was talking about the amount of damage that happens to blades because of the ice. I'm pretty sure it was him.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you can really shorten the lifetime with these blades. Just little tiny things. You know, they're big into the pitch alignment fix, which totally makes sense to me, and how they can extend the lifetime of wind turbines. But the ice is the other piece. Like, man, there's so much problem with ice and the loading and the unloading. You know, lifetimes get shortened.
There's a company I talked to not too long ago that does some CMS stuff, and they're one of the differences that they do in the market. And I'm not going to say their name because we haven't talked enough where I'm ready to throw them out. Like, they kind of get some information from their board and whatnot. But the difference is they're monitoring 24/7, and because they're monitoring 24/7, rather than just like grabbing a blurb of data and sending it out, because they're monitoring 24/7, they can actually start to calculate some of those fatigue, life, damage, defects, types of things of that sort. So they might be able to tell you, hey, this icing event that lasted 4 days took 9 months of life off of your blades. And that starts to get really interesting to me.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If you're a technician and you're in Texas and there's not a lot of icing in Texas and you're on the farm and you see ice on these blades, I assume there's some safety protocols that come into place. Do they just close off access to the facility so you don't get hit with ice, or what is the standard procedure there? Standard procedure,
I would say, is you'll put a exclusion zone. Just like if you have a damage, if you had a blade that cracked off or something up tower, you always put an exclusion zone around it. There'll be signs, cones, this thing, like don't go here. If it's a wind farm wide issue, I would say most people are going to the O&M building and having a lot of coffee that day and catching up on some paperwork because they're not going to the field. The other thing, I know some prudent operators will, there's normally always ranchers, landowners and other things on site. They will send out they've got usually a communication system with those people as far as an email chain or a text or something like, hey, just letting you know, we might have some ice up on the blades. Don't go hang out underneath them. Maybe keep your cattle away from them.
Yeah, keep your cattle in. Yeah. Well, in terms of getting access to the turbines and climbing up in the nacelles and being up on the outside, even with there's just a little bit of ice, not saying some of these huge storms, but even when it's just icy conditions, I assume they put restrictions on what you can and cannot do. You're not climbing on top of the nacelle.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, you're not.
Okay. Basically, once you get to the point where there might be ice accumulation, even if it's close, it's exclusion zone time. Like you're not going to you're not going to that base of that turbine at all. Because it's just too dangerous. It's too risky. You can't. I mean, a hunk of ice comes off that thing. Even a small 5-pound piece of ice. If we could do the quick math on what kind of velocity it can reach from that high, right? It'll smash your windshield. Your hard hat. You almost might as well not have a hard hat on. To be honest with you, at the damage it can do.
Yeah, it's being like hit with a Buick from 100 feet.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty much it's going to feel like.
Yeah. And they've got some, and everybody's got a couple tricks up their sleeve as far as, like I was saying kind of earlier in this little bonus episode of, you pitch a little bit, wait till the sun comes out, and then you'll pitch the pressure side and get some sunlight on it, and then you'll pitch it and get the pressure side, get some sunlight on it, then hit the leading edge, and then you might unlock the rotor and let it spin and see if it'll slough some of it off. But you can do that all remotely, right? Like that's done from a laptop in a truck.
You better.
Yeah, you're not climbing under. You're not going into the tower and running the controls in there to do that. So, you can a lot of times.
I'm sure it's happened. That's happened. It's had to.
I'm sure.
Come on. It's Texas. Right?
Instead of hard hats, it's cowboy hats.
Well, yeah, it's just a kind of Midwest way of doing stuff. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that it would have happened, especially 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Probably been the way they did it.
And on the other side of it, there is a lot of operators. So we talk about fatigue life and all these things. In the United States, as we all know, kind of how things operate, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years, when these blades have a 25 year lifespan, they're repowering anyways. So there's a lot of people that are just like, run it. Don't worry about the ice. If we get an alarm that says you've got some damage, maybe we'll shut them down. Otherwise, let them buck. A lot of people do that too. To be honest, I'm just,
Yeah. Hey, it's all about the dollar at the end of the day.
Yep.
It's what it is.
Yep.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion, Joel, and I'm sorry you're in an ice storm, but I think it's good to highlight the safety right now. If you're near wind turbines that have ice on them, be careful. Technicians, be careful out there. It's going to be a rough winter.
Yeah. You guys are the ones that make all this happen for all of us. So we can't afford to lose any of you. Stay safe around the icy turbines.
Stay safe.